المؤلفة لكتاب الرقص في منطقة حضر الطيران لعام 2005 تعمل على كتاب المواقع الأثرية ما بين النهرين وتأثيرها على الثقافة المعاصرة. تتفضل بصحبة الأستاذ عمار الشلا للترجمة.
Hadani is specialized in the capture of the Iraqi civilization, and she is the author of the book The Dance in the Area of No-Fly Zone.
Dancing in the No-Fly Zone.
She is working on another book, The Locations of Archaeological Places in the Mesopotamia. Also, she keen of the effect of these books on the temporary culture. She has some words to speak now.
مرحبا، أنا اسمي حداني ديتمارس and أنا كندية بس 60 من لبنان. I have been in Iraq since 1997.
كان في العراق منذ عام 1997.
This is my first book. It's called Dancing in the No-Fly Zone, and it's about pre- and post-invasion culture. The National Orchestra, the National Theater, poets, artists, the روح العراقية.
تعمل على مجالات السيمفونية، الفرق السيمفونية الوطنية والفنانين والكتاب والعاملين في مجال الثقافة.
And now I'm here writing a book on ancient sites and contemporary culture, which are very much exemplified in the Babylon Festival. This morning I went to temples in Babylon, and now I am with poets. So alhamdulillah, and thank you to Dr. Ali Shala for organizing this amazing event.
تعمل في مجال الثقافة وزارة هذا اليوم المعابد في المواقع الأثرية، وتشكر الدكتور علي الشلاء على الدعوة والوجود في هذا المهرجان.
So I know how important poetry is in Iraq. Most people think of Iraq in terms of war and terror, but my mission for more than 3 decades now has been to communicate about the culture of Iraq as a place of the cradle of civilization.
وتعرف جيدا مدى اهتمام العراقيين في مجال الشعر، ومنذ 30 عام هي تعمل على هذا الاتجاه ومتابعة النشاط الثقافي العراقي.
In Canada, we have 2 famous poets. One is Robert Crouch, and he came to the Babylon Festival in the 80s to read from his poetry. And one night, he went for a walk and there was no one on the street, and he was worried that the missiles from Iran were coming again.
في كندا يوجد شاعران، أحدهم روبرت كروتش الذي سبق وأن زار العراق وكان في أيام القصف الصواريخ الإيرانية السابقة.
He went back to his hotel and he asked the night dustman, "Is the war on again?" And the night dustman said, "No, everyone is at home watching the national poetry competition on television."
عندما عاد إلى الفندق سأل هل عادت الحرب ثانية؟ قالوا له لا كلا، ونحن الآن نراقب التلفزيون والأمور الاعتيادية.
So my book is full of translations of Iraqi poems by Al-Bayati, Rabia, etc. I'm going to read a very quick poem, and then I'm going to read an excerpt from my book. This is in honor of our Syrian guests. It's called Mariupol Aleppo. Mariupol Aleppo, watching it all unfold from a ruined city, rebuilding in a cafe run by Syrian refugees, the sound of barrel bombs so familiar, the cries of small children, and that look in your eyes that keeps me alive. War as imagined by Proust. À la recherche du temps perdu et plus la même chose. I love the way your hands move when you speak about your village, remembering the flowers, the white of martyrs, and the scent of spring. So if anyone wants the translation of that, we can work it out later, because I know you're short of time. So now I'm going to read you from the chapter in my book about Karim Wasfi. It was really a surprise to see him last night. I had no idea he would be performing here. Chapter 5 of my first book is dedicated to Karim and the National Orchestra, so I'm going to read you an excerpt from that, which will be translated into Arabic. So I'm going to read it first. Chapter 5 of Dancing in the No-Fly Zone, Karim. The next morning, after a fitful sleep interrupted by the sound of gunfire and the rumble of tanks, I pondered what to do on my second day in the new Iraq. This was in 2003. How many people speak English here? Okay, 2, 3. As I read my fortune in the grounds of my strong Arabic coffee, the telephone rang. It was Karim, the principal cellist in the Iraqi National Orchestra. I had emailed him from Amman to say I would arrive that week, but how had he known the exact time I'd be in my hotel? This felt a bit like the old Iraq, where people would just turn up by accident at the most opportune moments. Karim, I said on the phone, it's so nice to hear your voice. Can I come up, he replied. This was new. In the old Iraq, there had been elevator guards at each floor, there to thwart dangerous liaisons or espionage, but more than happy to turn a blind eye for a few dollars. Are you allowed to, I asked. Of course I am, said Karim. See you in a minute. As I waited, I remembered the last time we'd seen each other. It was in early 2001, and I was about to leave Baghdad in a service taxi. Karim had given me a bag of oranges and chocolate and pistachios for the road and wished me a safe journey. Take care, he said, as if I were the one that needed looking after, not him, a young orphaned artist trying to provide for his 2 younger sisters in a sanctions-plagued city. He played the host that visit, even inviting me to stay with him and his sisters at their apartment when my US dollars started to run out. Amazingly, the minders at the press center had apparently never discovered my alternate lodging arrangements, even though foreign journalists staying with locals was more or less forbidden, and the apartment was right in front of the Ministry of Information. The Wasfi family apartment and the ministry were part of a complex of state-owned buildings in an area that was now close to the Green Zone. The area also included the El Rashid Theater and the Mansour Milia Hotel, the latter a cavernous behemoth from the 80s that hosted mass weddings, a Ba'athist gesture of goodwill for cash-strapped Iraqis and B-list foreign dignitaries. It was Ramadan, and I would come back home after a frustrating day interviewing people who would take one look at my minder and offer up nothing but Ba'athist platitudes, to freshly cooked dolmas prepared by Karim's sisters and auntie. Photos of his parents, both of whom had died from mysterious post-Gulf War cancers, overlooked the comforting domestic scene. When the press center, a claustrophobic space full of mustachioed spooks, chain-smoking black Sumer cigarettes, got to be too much, I would pop over to the apartment and listen to Karim practice the cello. Karim was part Circassian and part Turkish. His mother had been Egyptian and his father a famous Iraqi actor. More than 6 feet tall and at least 250 pounds, he was not someone to take lightly in any sense. When he played the cello, his huge frame wrapped around its shape and diffused into a giant being of sound. That sound had occupied such a huge space, reverberating in his apartment and then in my memory. It was such a contrast to the gloomy press center that sometimes it was hard to believe that the soaring spirit of Karim's cello and the depressing pettiness of Ba'athist apparatchik bureaucracy occupied the same country. Shh! But they did. And that was part of the attraction. What kept me coming back for more? How to bleed that unexpected greatness, that astonishing depth of meaning out of concrete walls of suffering, out of days spent with stone-faced minders. Somehow, I always managed. Indeed, that's how I first met Kareem, one evening after a thunderstorm during my 2000 wallpaper visit, exhausted by 2 weeks detailing the excesses of brutalist Iraqi architecture. I'd wandered accidentally into the Al Rashid Theater. I was feeling dead inside, crushed by the weight of the regime and the heat of the long day, and I walked into a room full of the most beautiful music. It was the orchestra playing Heartbeat of Baghdad, a symphonic poem by a young Iraqi composer. My affair with the city was rekindled, Pastor Playhouse. I'd stayed in touch with Kareem by telephone and email. On February 17th, 2001, the day after Baghdad had been bombed by US warplanes, he'd phoned me to wish me a happy birthday, not even mentioning the bombing until I brought it up. He'd been performing Beethoven's sonata in G minor in the garden of the Orfali Cultural Center when guided missiles lit up the night sky. He paused for a moment, he told me, and then calmly said to the audience, "Go if you must, but I'm staying. I came here to play music." Almost everyone remained seated until he had finished his performance.
المقطع هذا فصل من مقالة طويلة كتبتها حول الفنان عازف التشيلو كريم كنعان وصفي. سأضيف الوقت سأقرأ القسم الأخير والمهم في تقديري من ما كتبت في مقالتها عن الفنان عازف كريم كنعان وصفي. كان كريم من أصول شركسية وتركية، كانت والدته الراحلة مصرية، وكان والده ممثلا عراقيا شهيرا يبلغ طوله أكثر من 6 أقدام و250 رطلا على الأقل، ولم يكن شخصا يستحق به بأي حال من الأحوال. عندما عزف على آلة التشيلو لف جسمه حول التشيلو واندمج معه في كيان صوتي هائل. لقد احتل هذا الصوت مساحة كبيرة تردد صداها في شقته ثم في ذاكرته. كان هذا مما يتناقض مع مركز الصحافة القاتم لدرجة أنه كان من الصعب أحيانا تصديق أن الروح المرتفعة للتشيلو كريم والبيروقراطية البعثية المحبطة والخسيسة قد احتلتا البلد نفسه، لكنهم فعلوا، وكان ذلك جزءا من الجاذبية، ما جعلني أعود للمزيد كيف أنزف تلك العظمة غير المتوقعة، ذلك العمق المذهل للمعنى من جدران المعاناة الخرسانية. بعد الأيام التي أمضيتها مع أصحاب الوجوه الحجرية بطريقة ما تمكنت دائما في الواقع هذه هي الطريقة التي التقيت بها كريم لأول مرة. في إحدى الأمسيات بعد عاصفة رعدية خلال زيارتي عام 1998 استنفذت بأسبوعين تفاصيل التجاوزات الوحشية على فن العمارة. كنت أتجول بالصدفة في مسرح الرشيد، كنت أشعر بالميت في الداخل، وسحقني ثقل النظام وحرارة النهار الطويل، ودخلت غرفة مليئة بالموسيقى جميلة. كانت الأوركسترا تعزف نبضات بغداد، وهي قصيدة سيمفونية لمؤلف موسيقي عراقي شاب، وشئت أن أعيد إحياء علاقتي بالمدينة. بقيت على اتصال بكريم عبر الهاتف والبريد الإلكتروني في 17 شباط 2001. بعد يوم من قصف الطائرات الحربية الأمريكية لبغداد اتصل بي هاتفيا ليتمنى لي عيد ميلاد سعيد، ولم يذكر موضوع القصف حتى طرحته عليه. كان يؤدي سوناتا بيتهوفن في مقام سي الصغير في حديقة مركز الأورفل الثقافي عندما أضاءت صواريخ كروز سماء الليل. قال لي أنه توقف للحظة ثم قال للجمهور بهدوء: اذهبوا إذا كان عليكم ذلك، لكنني سأبقى. جئت إلى هنا لأعزف الموسيقى. غالبا بقي الجميع جالسين حتى انتهى من أدائه.
Shukran, thank you so much, and I hope that I'll have a discussion with some of my fellow writers here. I'm very interested in learning more about your work, and I hope we can have a chat.
في الموضوع ترغب في الحديث مع بعض الضيوف والأصدقاء.